Good evening. I'm Liz Joyner, founder and president of the Village Square. And on behalf of the Village Square and Florida Humanities, we're so glad you've joined us tonight for Us at 250 Pride, Reckoning, Aspiration with our special guest, Dr. Theodore R. Johnson. This program is made possible by funding from Florida Humanities. It's part of a multi-year series of digital programs, UNUM Democracy Reignited, presented in partnership with Florida Humanities with support from Federation of State Humanities Councils and Mellon Foundation, exploring the past, present, and future of the American idea as it exists on paper, in the hearts of our people, and as it manifests in our lives. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in the program do not necessarily represent those of Florida Humanities. If you're not familiar with the work of Florida Humanities, we're putting their web address in the chat. Be sure to check them out. The chat window will be closed this evening, but you can ask questions at any time during the program by clicking on the Q&A link at the bottom of your screen. If you haven't taken our pre-event survey yet, if you take just a moment to do so now, we're dropping the link into the chat thread too. Your honest and anonymous answers will help the Village Square with a major nationally scoped research effort to better understand divisions in the United States. Even if you've done the survey for another program, we ask that you complete it again this time. We are delighted to welcome streaming partners Bridge USA, Braver Angels, USC Center for the Political Future, Living Room Conversations, National Institute for Civil Discourse, Listen First Project, Civic Health Project, McCourtney Institute for Democracy, Unify, Talking Politics and Religion Without Killing Each Other podcast, Citizen Connect, Center for the Humanities at University of Miami, Network for Responsible Public Policy, and our wonderful long-term local partners, the Tallahassee Democrat and WFSU Public Media. We hope you'll take an opportunity to check out some of those organizations doing incredible work of citizenship across the country. Before I turn it over to our facilitator tonight, I wanted to say a word about our guest. As the Village Square has navigated through these tumultuous times for those of us who care about the health of this now officially 250-year-old experiment, there really just isn't anyone who so eloquently and intelligently lights the lantern of citizenship as Ted does. If you haven't read his books, I implore you to start tomorrow with When the Stars Begin to Fall and find out why we're such big fans of his work. We're excited that we'll close our 250th year series with Jeff Rosen of the National Constitution Center on March 2nd, Jane Kaminsky of Monticello on March 31st, and constitutional scholar Yuval Levin of American Enterprise Institute on June 16th. All of these great programs are made possible by Florida Humanities, led by the gentleman that it's now my pleasure to introduce tonight. Dr. Nasheed Majouin is Executive Director of Florida Humanities. Dr. Majouin's extensive professional career in the humanities includes his past leadership at the James Eaton Senior Southeastern Regional Black Archives at Florida A&M University and the Art Museum and Archives at Hampton University. Dr. Majouin has served on a host of boards, including the Blues Foundation, the Austin's Art Council, Arkansas Black History Commission, Virginia State Heritage Preservation Board, Visit Florida, and the African American History Task Force for the state of Florida. He is the author of A Contemporary Key to American Optimism, Unlocking the Foundations, a comprehensive exploration of political philosophy for beginners and seasoned scholars. Nasheed.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm happy to be a part of this program. You've done a wonderful job of bringing scholars and helping us to think. I'm smiling because one of the partners, thinking politically without killing ourselves. It that's so important, and we
That's
should be
correct.
able to have dialogue during these times. And so you're right. Ted has been with us several times, and he's definitely the right person for these times because we can think and look at these topics from both sides, all sides, three and four, five sides. So it is now truly my pleasure to introduce tonight's special guest, Dr. Theodore R. Johnson III. The author, as mentioned earlier, When the Stars Began to Fall, Overcoming Racism and Renewing the Promise of America, and more importantly to me, his most recent book, If We Are Brave, Essays of Black Americana. Ted is a senior advisor at New America, leading its flagship Us at 250 initiative, marking the nation's semi-quincentennial, and a contributing columnist to the Washington Post. Prior to joining New America, he was a senior fellow at the Brennan Center for Justice at the NYU School of Law. He is a retired commander in the United States Navy, serving as a White House fellow in the first Obama administration and a speechwriter to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. His work on race relations has appeared in prominent national publications importantly, across the political spectrum, including the New York Times Magazine, The Atlantic, the Wall Street Journal, and National Review, among others. And important to Ted's bio, as we mentioned earlier, Ted has been twice a special guest of this very UNUM series. No other guest has joined us more than once, and so that's important to note. And so, welcome back, Ted.
Thank you. Always good to be here. I love it here.
Yeah, yeah. So, so we're a fan, as you know. We keep telling you, and we have talks prior and after, and there's a lot to talk about, a lot to consider. And you've approached this work from the experiences in your career. And so, we didn't mention all the important background elements to your career, but if you could share some elements of your bio that helped you frame what you do, why you're so passionate about citizenship and how we contribute.
Yeah. No, it's I don't know. I think it's like a lot of American stories. You sort of find elements in your history that helps you understand the world as it exists today, and I think that sort of has guided my approach to questions facing the country. I'm the child of two parents who grew up in the Jim Crow South, one in Georgia and one in South Carolina. Both of them did not go to integrated schools, even though they graduated high school in the 1970 and college in the early 70s. Always were in segregated schools, even though Brown v. Board was 16 years earlier. And so a lot of the way I think about the world is based on their experience growing up in
Mhm.
poverty, children of sharecroppers, Jim Crow South, and finding a way to raise me like a Cosby kid on the Huxtable, on the Cosby Show, like one of the Huxtables. They both went to college, they worked for IBM, and so by the time I came along, I had a much different American experience from them, and so that always issues of class and education were always prominent for me, and the way race intersected. Also, I was raised in the church.
Yeah.
I think probably from the ages of 3 or 4 to about 18, I was in church 3 or 4 times a week.
Mm.
Bible study, youth night, choir practice, church, and so a lot of my faith and sort of and optimism in the American experiment at all is grounded in the faith I learned growing up and believing that things you can't see are still possible, but only if faith without works is dead. Only if you're willing to work to bring those things to
Mm.
fruition. And then the last piece is a lot of the rights that were denied. The people I descend from, the right to vote, to fair pay, equal opportunity, et cetera, were denied, or were available to me because of their sacrifices. And so I think lots about questions of fairness and equality, and how that gets translated or not through government. So that
Mm.
brings me to questions of race and identity, questions of like democracy and Republican design, and questions of identity and belonging in this broader American project.
Yeah, perfect. There's and it's identity, and the narrative, ethical self-understanding, and
Mm,
that type of package. You mentioned two things. the Cosby kid, your name is Theo. So we're
That's
gonna go
right.
down the road here in a second. And I will mention, being understanding religion is a part of your faith. And I had a duality in my background. My father was a part of the Nation of Islam for a period of time, but
Mm,
my
hmm.
grandfather, whose birthday was yesterday, was a Southern Baptist preacher. So imagine what's going on Friday and then what's going on Sunday, and then
Right.
that those conversations. But so I get that. But Theo, just speaking of that name, and Theodore Roosevelt Johnson III,
Mm,
there's how tell us about a little bit about your name.
yeah. Yeah, no, the name comes from I'm the third, so my it comes from my grandfather. It stems from when Vice President Teddy Roosevelt became president in 1901 when McKinley was assassinated. And one of the things Teddy Roosevelt did in his first month as president was invite Booker T. Washington to the White
Hmm.
House. And he did it one at a time where that just did not happen. I mean, even when Frederick Douglass visited Abraham Lincoln, he often went through the back door to meet with Lincoln. He wasn't, could not come through the front door that suggested equality. Certainly couldn't eat with him publicly. That
Hmm.
suggested equality. Roosevelt did both of those things with Booker T. Washington, and not because he was this, super progressive on race, even though he was probably progressive for his time. This was a political maneuver. He
Okay.
wanted to win over, and essentially to ensure peace in the South. He wanted Booker T. Washington to sort of say, Black folks, I know the nation's not fair, but if you just work with us and bide your time, we'll get to a better version of America. And it was sort of a political conversation between the two. Well, the next morning, when the news gets out that this Black man dined with the President Roosevelt and the first family as an equal in the White House, lots of people were very upset. I can't even, words that were printed in editorials then, I couldn't say here,
Right.
because of how inappropriate it is. But there were some folks who were inspired, and they often were poor Black folks in the South, and especially in this heyday of lynching, Jim Crow South. The idea that this president would invite a Black man to eat with him, to dine with him as his equal, made Roosevelt somewhat of a hero. And my great grandparents were some of those folks so inspired. And so that they named their third son after Teddy Roosevelt to sort of mark this moment where it's not silly that Black sharecroppers in the South would have a child named after a rich white New Yorker president in the White House,
Right.
because this is our country too. And so this is sort of the history, the namesake legacy I sort of descend from, a belief in the country,
Right.
a belief that there's a place for us even that when we can't see it, and that um, the aspirations for who we can be are not bound by the moment that we live in. That if we do our part, future generations will realize and touch parts of the country that just weren't available to us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's very compelling. I have a history with names, my name Nasheed Salim Madyun, coming from eventually a Baptist preacher. My name was originally James Bingham. And
Oh wow.
yeah, yes, yeah. So, names and words resonate. And so I wanted to get into us at 250
Mhm.
second, but a point that you mentioned about Theodore Roosevelt and Booker T. Washington that resonates with us in Florida, and that when just before Theodore Roosevelt became governor, of New York, he had a chance to lead an expedition, the Rough Riders, through
Oh, that's right.
Florida into Tampa, and the War for Independence in Cuba, and the U.S. colored troops and Buffalo Soldiers were a part of that saving grace story.
Hmm.
And he spoke highly about that. And at the turn of the century, you know, making the paper with those types of statements. Would have risked his charge to be governor of New York, and
Mm.
to have people that bold that don't look at race, they look at the essence of what people are about, and I think that resonated, and yeah, so
Mm,
names matter, but now it's us at 250. Here is a question we're going to dive into here. You know, you speak with the 250 of this American experiment and New America. Three words: pride, reckoning, and aspiration. And we're
mm,
going to look at those themes, those words as themes. But, you know, we start with, pride in the nation's progress,
mhm,
reckoning with historical and contemporary wrongs, and aspiration for a better future. Um,
mhm,
Considering what we've dealing with the news over the past year and a half, I would say, um, there's a point you make. How can we be prideful without being a part of a neglect of history? How can you be proudful without ignoring that there are some wrongs? So allowing those
mm,
wrongs to occur, but standing up with pride. Let's start with that, with pride.
mhm. Yeah, I mean, pride is, as you said, sort of a pride in how far we've come. And
Mm.
so it's not blind celebration or uncritical praise. It's not sort of a pat ourselves on the back, or as we should say in the military, a self-licking ice cream cone. We're not here just to praise ourselves. The pride in the progress means we have come from a place that is worse than where we are now.
Mm.
And so it's a recognition that things used to be worse than they are today. And the
Right.
only reason that they're not, that things are better, is because people died, bled, sweat, sacrificed. They cared enough to make the country better. And so we take pride in those sacrifices, pride in those people and their efforts, pride in the coalitions and the movements that helped the country become better. Because the even if the nation has never fully lived up to its professed ideals, the amount of blood and sweat people have given to make the nation a better version of itself
Mm.
is worthy of commemoration itself. And so I probably said this the last time I was here, but being a black man in America in
Right.
2026 is far better than being one in 1926 or 1826. And it doesn't mean that today's perfect. It doesn't mean that we've solved the nation's problems, but it does mean that the work of previous generations was not in vain. And we should be proud of that work. We should celebrate it, celebrate those people. That is as much a part of our story as is, some of the uglier parts that we don't like to talk about as much.
Well, yeah. So prior to the start of the show, we had a brief discussion about Frederick Douglass and his speech in 1882, and is relevant to what you just framed as far as um, you know, what do we see? What can we be proud of in our self-evaluation as American citizens, as African Americans, and just I think 6 miles from where I'm sitting right now, there's the oldest bank in the state of standing bank in the state of Florida. 1841 is the Union Bank, and
Mhm,
it was at one point the Freedmen's Bureau Bank that
mhm,
Frederick Douglass helped to facilitate. And what was monumental about that bank and the Freedmen's Bureau's bank, we looked at the papers of those rolls. The majority of the new accounts were not men, they were women leading the
mhm,
household with their signatures and their X marking the box. But I wanted to put that out there to look at how far we come because they couldn't vote. Women were not voting
mhm,
at the
mhm,
time. But Frederick Douglass gave a speech that allowed us to ask the question, what does 1776, what does July 4th mean to Black America? And you had a brief talk about that and your grandparents looking forward. I would like to get your thoughts about in this term of pride, what we can still be proud of, and looking forward. There are things that we have not fixed. Maybe there are things that we would never fix. There are some core values we talked about, but there are some things that, I mean, you were commander of the U.S. Navy, you command in the U.S. Navy. So there are some monumental elements to your American life that was not available in 1882 when Frederick Douglass is saying, what is Black America?
Yeah. No, so that speech, the famous line in the speech, he gives it in Rochester. I always thought it was in Boston, but it's in Rochester, in front of in an abolitionist society, essentially, but mostly in a crowd of white people. It's 1852, so it's even a decade before the Civil War is
Okay.
really
Hmm.
underway. And the line in there is, "What to the slave is the Fourth of July."
Yeah.
He
Hmm.
begins by saying, your founders created this beautiful thing called the democracy, a democratic republic. There's a democracy element to it, there's a representative element to it. It's a beautiful system, and you should be very proud of it. And the revolution fought to get out from under the King of England and the oppression there. Honorable, and you've created this thing that we would love to be a part of, but we're not,
Mm,
because when y'all built this, you built a nation founded on the principle of equality, and you enslaved people in the process. And so while you should be very proud of what your forefathers have created, and you should and we agree that the principles of liberty and equality and pursuit of happiness and all these things, equal rights, and like these are good, but they're not available to us. And so what to us is your independence, is the
mm,
nation's independence. What to us is liberty and equality when we were enslaved. And so it was both a sort of love letter to democracy and the founding of the country, and then a shining a glaring light on the hypocrisy of such a country that still managed to find for decades to enslave people. And so by pointing out both the beauty of the experiment and the hypocrisy in it, that's sort of what gave Douglas the power of that speech. And so at 250, I'm curious, what is the corollary to that question today? What is
yes.
the question that's being asked now? And I think it's still of a question of belonging, a question of equal protection, and a question who can compel government to be responsive to their needs. A question of power, in relation between government and the people. And while there's been tremendous progress, Frederick Douglass probably could not imagine the kind of that a black man was president just a decade ago. Um, he would also not be surprised at all of the racial disparities that still exist in America, in every aspect of any socioeconomic factor, almost any social or civic factor politically. The racial disparity is a product of a nation that has not fully addressed the wrongs that it committed for so many years. And so at 250, lots to celebrate, lots still to reckon with, if we ever hope to be the nation we aspire to be.
And thank you. That's the other word that we can focus on, a reckoning. But I'm going to change the narrative slightly though, because one thing that we can learn from the statement that Frederick Douglass made is that there's room for optimism. There's room, if you speak about hypocrisy, you have to also be able to speak about um, the triumphs. He would have anticipated Jim Crow, debt peonage, and sharecropping. He would have anticipated a community trying to hold on to a wealth, hold on to, remember, the lost cause and all of those things. And then coming out of that, he would have anticipated that children's rights, women's rights, labor, those things that America has been able to correct. And you know, when you started to look at us at 250, you had the opportunity to um, think about outcomes. And that was several months ago, a couple of years ago. You had these outcomes, and you probably had less wrinkles in your forehead, and you thought that we were about to make some things happen. The common sense, Thomas Paine, and all of these things with that contract with America. But now here we are. We're in the year of this 250th anniversary, and it's a time of reflection. One, have we accomplished some of the things that you anticipated as far as outcomes? And two, we still have time. What are some things we have yet to do? What can we do that could make us at 250 meaningful to you?
Yeah, so when we started this, we wanted to do three things. The first thing was provide a narrative framework for how we think about this milestone anniversary, and that's where we get the Pride, Reckoning, and Aspiration tagline. Because we did not want this just to be a celebration. We also did not want this to be a sort of a long-standing indictment of the country because of
Right.
all the things it hadn't done right yet or hadn't done right well enough. And so we believed, as many others have believed, Baldwin, Frederick Douglass,
Yes.
King, like you name it, that you can both love the nation and critique it. And
Yeah.
so the first thing we wanted to do was imbue everything else we did with that spirit. The second thing we did was, instead of doing a sort of traditional DC think tank thing, is sort of find the smart people, bring them in house, do some really smart work, and then share it with the world. We believe that the best model for how to
Yeah.
celebrate the 250th was already happening in communities around the country. And our job was to go find people already living into these values and give them more resources, a network, more spotlight,
Mm.
to help scale their efforts and perhaps be an example for others in other places. So we created a fellowship, and we've had everything from spoken word poets to Presbyterian pastors to journalists covering local stories about civic healing or uncomfortable histories or
Yeah.
changing demography, and help bring their work and their sort of approach to bringing people together to a bigger audience. Then the last thing we did was, we believe in the power of getting people in rooms together.
Yes.
And when we do that, not getting them together on some basis other than what divides them or what separates them
Mm.
from someone else. So we didn't want to prime the identities that cause people to come into conflict with one another. Lots of organizations do that and do it very well. So we didn't need to be duplicative there. Instead,
Right.
what we wanted to do was put people in spaces for constructive shared experiences around comedy or music or sports, and get to know folks that they probably wouldn't talk to if they knew who they voted for in the last election. But because they're there as just people, that sort of allows opportunity for connection that other instances may not. So this was our approach, and our hopeful our intended outcome, or our hope was that we would have a number of positive examples of what happens when you get people in space together, when
Mm.
you
Yes.
have constructive shared experiences, and so on. And that is held true. What we didn't
Okay.
anticipate was that the moment would not be a unifying one. The 250th has become as politicized as everything else in this country these days, and the efforts, both those that are sort of pro-civic and those that may be more just sort of uncritical celebration, are happening in pockets and not. So it feels like 1,000 different celebrations for one
Yeah.
shared anniversary instead of a unified one. So I did not expect that outcome. I did expect lots of interest. I expected lots of local activities. I did not expect that it would feel that the unifying potential of the holiday. I did not think it wouldn't come to fruition, and it's been tougher than we thought. That said, like you said, there's still time,
Right.
and
Yeah.
my
You knew
only
I was gonna re-ask it. I was gonna ask it again.
yeah, I would just encourage folks to find out what's happening local to you, not even connected to 250, just generally. It's like we all went in our houses when COVID hit, and it's been slow trying to pull us back to the life that
Yeah.
existed pre-COVID. But keeping appointments with folks, lunch dates and coffees, getting out, speaking to the neighbors at the grocery store, being engaged civically is the best thing that you can do for the long-term health of the country, 250 and beyond. And it sometimes feels inadequate when there's so much chaos happening around us on a daily basis. But planting the the long-term seeds of like civic health are
Mm.
are just as important as the triage that sometimes these moments require.
Ah, triage. I have to make a shameless plug, and then I'm gonna go back to your question. But one of the programs we have here at Florida Humanities is Dear Stranger. And
Right.
yeah. And so, question to you. Well, first to frame it, we have an enduring question. We prompt an anonymous letter exchange. And one of the ideas, like you mentioned, keeping a coffee date, keeping dinner with people to have a conversation, we don't write each other letters. I'm in a long distance relationship, and I received a card in just saying, "Hey, how are you doing?" From Houston, and those little touches of a card, sending
Hmm.
something to somebody, to say thank you for your donation, but letting them know that, this is special. Those small things of civic engagement, it comes out in our program, Dear Stranger. I invite people to participate. But even so, just write letters to people, period, your loved ones, and talk
Hmm.
about your life. If it's you writing a letter to your granddaughter of sorts. But going back to 2 points in us at 250 and your anticipated outcome, some of the programs, how can help me reconcile with two elements, America at 250 and sports? Us at 250 and comedy. You have a comedy program as well. Those are two programs and two initiatives I think that can shed light on people coming together. I think that's the aspiration there. But if you could tell us more about that.
Yeah, so the comedy piece is actually a holdover from my time in the military, frankly. The a whole lot of time in uniform is spent waiting for something to happen, and usually nothing happens, but you have to be on watch waiting for the thing to happen
Hmm.
just in case it does. And that leads to a lot of downtime with people bored together for long stretches of time and away from their loved ones,
Yeah.
sometimes in harm's way. Humor is the thing that, for as long as there has been hardship in the world, whether military, slavery, caste systems, you name it, war, whatever it is, people have managed to find humor to just mentally survive the circumstances and get to the next day. And so, in a truly polarized country where government is not responsive to the people, and even now where government is abusive of people, um, it, it is it is intrinsically human to still find moments of humor, to
Mhm.
find moments of levity, to remember that you have a spirit that needs nurturing, and it can't just be battle all the time everywhere you go. So comedy was it's just sort of a balm for the human condition, I think. And so we leaned into that,
Yeah.
as one
I
way.
like it.
Yeah. Sports is, if think of, I don't, whoever your favorite team is. Let's say you're from, let's say it's the Buccaneers in Tampa, right? If
I
everyone,
go. I need to be clear. This, this is the Pittsburgh Steelers,
Mm,
Arkansas Razorbacks, and Boston Celtics. You can go run however you want to, but I
yeah, I
just need to
got you.
put that
So,
out there.
right. So let's say you go to a Steelers game, right? And instead of Steelers fans wearing Steelers gear, they wear the color of the party they voted for in the last election.
Mm,
Suddenly, that unified black and gold stadium
right.
is now a very probably contentious sea of red and blue,
Yeah.
and
Ah,
it's because you've primed the things that make them don't like one another, instead of bringing them together under some shared identity,
okay.
some common set of values, or ideals, or whatever, in this case fandom, and allow that to be the bridge for connection. And then when the hard stuff comes up, you at least have some basis to see the humanity of other people, some common ground with other people, and don't perceive them to be wholly evil simply because they have a different view on any number of issues. And so sports is, and other, the arts and beyond, are ways of getting people in spaces where they're doing something they have a shared enjoyment of, for these
Hmm.
constructive shared experiences that make them more resilient to divisive appeals when they inevitably show up.
Wow. Yeah. So. we can not like the other team. We can think politically. We can have a dialogue again without killing each other, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, right, right.
So,
I mean, sports fans aren't always civil, you know,
yeah,
but they do love the folks on their team, you know, the folks on their side, and that love crosses racial lines, often crosses gender lines, class lines, political lines, until you poke the places that divide them instead of prime the places that connect them. So
yeah,
you know, the analogy isn't a perfect one. It falls apart a little bit. But the idea that we should try to find common basis with people who are different from us, I think that that's just a good virtue for societies to practice to have.
yeah, yeah. I found that comedians are they're inquisitive, they're curious. They could be poetic, highly intelligent, to find laughter in the most difficult situations, casting class. Oftentimes the comedians are talking about their life, their households, and language barriers. Um, and there's often intersections between communities. People can relate to the comedian's life, even if they're not from that background. But I want to transition to there's a guest we have coming in April on this Unum series, Monticello's Jane Comiskey, and she said, when she's in the trailer of the American Revolution documentary, saying that the American idea is leaky. The American
Mm,
idea is leaky, and while it started with landed white men, it spread.
mhm,
And it's a question is, do you agree? And is it leaky enough? A little bit loaded, but
mm.
I do think there's a lot of value to questioning where we are, and it does speak to the other part of your three, your triad, aspiration. So,
Yeah.
is American Idea leaky?
Yeah, yeah, it is. It is. I mean, look, when I don't know the exact saying, but basically the saying goes that as soon as you put an idea out into the world, you lose
Mm,
ownership of it. You know,
okay.
it's no longer yours. It's now the world's idea, and they get to play with it and model it, modify it, and do all the things they want to with it. So when you have slave owning white men say that. They believe in the that we're all created equal and that we have these unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that government derives its just power from the consent of the governed. They don't say anything about race and gender in that line. And so it shouldn't be surprising that over time the people who government forcibly excluded from
Mm,
access to the founding promise would insist that they should have access to it, especially when they're dying in the same wars, that they're paying the same taxes. You know, they're putting just as much skin in the game to keep the country afloat as anyone else,
yeah,
if not more. Why can't they touch some of that democracy? You know, why can't I get some of that liberty for me and my family? And
right.
so that idea leaked to the people it was supposed to contain,
Mm,
and they took ownership of it. And what we've learned is democracy is always improved by the people that were once excluded from it. It's always the ones at the margins that make democracy fuller, more robust, more expansive. It's never the folks at the core. It's those demanding access to it. And so, in my view of it, that is the story of American democracy. It's the story of excluded people demanding access to the rights that our founding documents say they're entitled to, and it's that struggle for access that makes the American experiment more expansive and more possible. And it's when revanchist forces try to constrain that access or pull it back from people that was once granted to, when those are the moments when I think the nation is at its worst and most regressive. And so the reason we can have this debate at all is because the idea is leaking, and that it leaked on to folks that it was again wasn't supposed to include, and even the folks who created the system they don't have enough power to contain who gets to be included.
So push back slightly. Now, if we say the American experiment is leaky and those who were marginalized or didn't have access to that were able to find a way, whatever means they found that, but they were able to find a way. That could be women voting, um, and definitely in this contest, caste and class situations and mobility, the middle class or the lower middle class was not always just African American. There were
That's
poor
right.
white folks as well,
That's
trying to
right.
find a way to get an education. And we have to recognize a lot of those pockets in our story. But that to me sounds like there's room for optimism. There's a hard walk. The grandparents who say, I walked 5 miles to school and through the snow
Hmm.
up a hill and down, but you went to school, not to trivialize that, but to me, that's a measure of optimism. But going back, I want to make sure the audience knows that they can ask questions. Here's a question from the audience, and there's a familiarity with your comedy program in Chicago, and you found a point of inspiration. It was inspiring. So if you could tell us a little bit more about what happened there. We talked
Yeah,
about
Chicago.
comedy and getting in the room, but
Yeah.
how did that work?
Yeah, yeah. So one of the things, I mean, as I mentioned, as a 250, we don't just empower people in their communities to get folks together. We also went looking for opportunities to find these different artsy kind of places
Hmm.
and leverage them for the this narrative framework around 250 that we're championing up at Pride, Recognize, Aspiration. So we partnered with the storytelling organization, The Moth, to bring storytellers that would tell their American stories that would hit on these different pillars. We've done, again, work with military veterans and comedy shows and improv. And the one in Chicago was with the Second City, the famed improv troupe that a lot of folks graduate from there and end up on Saturday Night Live in these places.
Really?
And we did a 250 themed show with them in Chicago, and the goal was to kind of poke fun at the flaws in the country, poke fun at the things that make us different and distinct, make America and Americans and American culture different and distinct, and not have some fun with the things that divide us and not see everything as an existential threat to both the country and to our relations with one another. But the week we planned to do this, we planned it months in advance, but the week we'd planned to do it, the week before, ICE had shown up in Chicago and started,
Wow.
deportation operations there. At a comedy club in Chicago, about a mile or so from where we had our event with the Second City, they yanked a guy off the street and ended up, beating someone who was trying to stop the abduction, a
Yeah.
citizen who was harmed in the process of that. This all happened a mile from where we were doing the show at Second City, and I even asked the folks there, should we cancel it? Are things just too hot right now? And maybe it would be bad form to show up for a comedy show, an improv show for
Hmm.
laughs when the nation's on fire. And they said, no one, we should definitely do this. This
Mm.
city needs a laugh, maybe more than any other city in America at the moment. And so we did, and it went well. It accomplished the objective. I think I've heard that Obama is working with one of the guys that created Seinfeld, Larry David, for a 250 themed sketch comedy show for HBO. So this isn't like Ted Johnson, out experimenting. Like, these are proven methods
Hmm.
of trying to use national moments to bring people together when things are divided. For the history buffs, that even when the military was segregated in World War I and II, definitely during World War II, the USO shows were there for everyone, and so you'd
Yeah.
have segregated troops laughing in the middle of a war zone during World War II because of the power of comedy and a taste of
Mm.
home. and a reminder of what it means to be American and how it feels and the things that are funny to us and the language that only we understand. It creates a deeper connection to our our sense of shared identity, which
Mm,
makes folks on the front end, deployed, more likely to be willing to sacrifice when they remember what they're fighting for and who they're fighting for. So there's a place for
right.
the arts and even amid struggle, but I do think you need to be conscious of the how you balance the two.
You're taking a piece of home, and I remember as we reflected on that, why is Bob Hope over there
Right.
providing
Exactly.
jokes to, and the troops take the time to breathe and
Right.
reflect and
Be
remember
human.
Toledo,
Yes,
Ohio, and all that. Yeah,
that's right.
yeah, yeah. And that leads to a quote that you're familiar with is James Baldwin. And you mentioned James Baldwin previously and alluded to criticism. The quote, I love America more than any other country in the world. And exactly for this reason, I insist on the right to criticize her
Right.
perpetually. And that leads me to ask this question. Um, did the framers believe they completed the work, or did they know that we would continue to reevaluate and criticize and reflect on accomplishments, but also obstacles and failures? Is it okay that we have these failures? Did the founders believe
Mm.
they got it right?
The founders knew they had compromised and
Mm,
did the best they could given the circumstances. And so they knew that what they put forward wasn't the perfect product, but they also knew it was as good as it was going to get. And ratifying the Constitution in this instance was absolutely necessary in order to keep the country, unified
yeah.
and strong enough to go forward. So, I think it was Jefferson that said, he expected that every generation would rewrite the Constitution essentially
Yeah.
because every generation has a different set of needs and demands and desires, and a document written in the 1770s may not speak to the moment of 1830 or
Well,
1880 or 1970.
not at all.
Um, yeah, so no, they knew it wasn't finished,
Yeah.
but they thought they'd laid a good framework for the thing to continue. Um, the and this the Baldwin quote goes directly back to the Frederick Douglass
Yeah.
speech. There's a lot of focus on like what to the slave is the Fourth of July. When that line comes halfway in of speech that's about 40 pages long,
Hmm.
and on the Baldwin quote, a lot of folks pay a lot of attention to the back half of the right to criticize America perpetually.
They do,
But
right.
yeah, right. But the other 20 pages of the Douglas pamphlet, and the first thing that James Baldwin says in this quote are about an appreciation for the country. Again, Douglas praised the genius of
Mm,
the system of democracy, and James Baldwin says, because I love this country, before he
right.
says anything else. It's the declaration of love that then, it's because of that then the critique is a requirement, because how can you love a child if you don't correct them?
Right.
How can like how can you love something and don't want to improve it and make it better and be honest with it where it's falling short? To just paper over all the things it gets wrong isn't love. It may be good for a nation's ego, but it does nothing for its people. So
Right.
and so I, I am just a proponent of taking the two together. To take love and the critique, to take praise for liberal democracy along with the need to reckon with its shortfalls, and not only harp on one, whether it's the pride element or the reckoning aspect, but to take the two together. And I think it's the doing that
Mm,
makes our country particular,
right.
distinct.
Yes.
Um, it's the ability for people who were on the fringes of society to proclaim a love for the nation they earned access to, and from now inside and
Right.
included in the country, now with access to more rights, still remind it where it fell short and the work that needs to happen for it to be who it says it wants to be.
Right. If I'm a parent I have two kids, they're grown, and now they critique me. And so, but if I'm a parent, you know how that goes. If I don't chastise you, if I don't push you, if I don't ask you about the next step, you've taken these three steps, but there's five more steps so you can get to the top. And what's going on? If I see that and I don't say it, do I really love you? If I let you harm yourself, I understand we need to allow you to fail, but if I can help you move forward, and with this country, I believe that there's a contract between the citizen and the government, and there's a responsibility for you to say, in my city, in my county, in my state, there's some things I need to thrive. I don't have the time or wherewithal to deal with that, but I need to speak up. You have the responsibility. We have questions from the audience, but there's a few of them that are very compelling. But before I get to one, Ted, I gotta tell you, you talked about rewriting the Constitution every 20 years because the generations are different.
Right.
So we in my office, we're the Library of Congress designee for the Center for the Book. And I'm laughing, I'm trying to hold back my laughter as I tell you this. Um, I'm 51, and we have staff that, are in their late 20s. They're going to get me tomorrow by mentioning this. And so the Library of Congress sends us a card catalog. And I'm like, yeah, I remember the card
Mhm.
catalog and
Right.
pulling out and going to my first job in Arkansas was an aide at a library. And, I brought by all these memories, and they were looking at it like it was just a block of wood. And like, what is a card catalog? I'm like, where are we? We definitely need to rewrite this whole understanding. I was so offended by the fact that the generations, have not been communicating. I understand technology and the advancements, but yes, we do need to. It is, and there is a point of optimism there because I am, the older guy. The country is reinventing itself. They found new tools. There are better ways to do things. I understand that. But to our previous point, we can't have amnesia. We can't forget about, some of the places we've come. But there's a question in the audience, from the audience, with increasing violence and hatred, the polarization that we talked about. How can we bridge the gap? We do have examples in our past of people crossing the aisle and shaking hands and making legislation move forward when you think something was not about to happen. How can we contribute to closing that gap?
Yeah, the gap between government and sort of and the people, what the people
Yes.
are looking for. Yeah. It, you know, um, Yeah, it's just a lot of people smarter than me have written great books about this. And the one that I think about most is from professor at Johns Hopkins, Liliana Mason. I think she's at Hopkins now. Uncivil Agreement, or I think that's the title of the book. But she basically says that partisan identities have
Mm,
become so bundled with other parts of our identity, like race and religion and rural versus urban, that that to critique someone's political beliefs is almost like to insult their character. And
mm,
so it's harder to find people across the aisle when the perception is they think you're evil, they think you're the problem with the country, and they don't want people like you to live in their America. It's hard to
yeah.
find common ground on like immigration reform when
Mm,
the other side thinks you're the devil. And so I think one of the things that has to happen, and even the founders wrote about this in the Federalist Papers about the way that factionalism or partisanship can destroy the whole experiment because it makes the people's central concern how to help their side do better and
mm,
not how to protect the country's interests or how to advance, how to ensure the system is robust and representative. And so um, I think the first thing that has to happen is each of the branches of government have to reassert the authority granted to them in the Constitution. And I'm really looking at Congress here.
yeah.
Yeah, that Congress has basically decided to be Democrats or Republicans instead of being a member of Congress that keeps a check on the presidency, no matter what party the presidency's from, and the Supreme Court, no matter which side holds the balance of power there. And so I think that to the extent that partisan identities are demoted in
Mm,
how we conceive of each other in a civic sense or how our politics operates, then there's just not much hope of finding common ground. The fallback, and political scientists are as guilty as anyone else of this thinking, is that, well, when a catastrophe happens, then the partisan stuff falls to the side because
right.
the threat threatens all of us, and now we have to be Americans first because the Pearl Harbor or after 9/11, now we have a common enemy external to us, and we can put our internal differences aside. But if you remember, during Pearl Harbor, if you were Japanese American in the United States, you got rounded up without due process and put in an internment camp, which
Right.
is basically what's happened to immigrants today. Under Franklin Delano Roosevelt did it with an executive order. Donald Trump is doing a lot of his actions with an executive order. If you remember after 9/11, President Bush said, this is not a war against Islam, and you should continue about your life and not let the terrorists win. But the next day, they were mosques were vandalized across the country. Hate crimes were up
Right.
against people like Sikhs who weren't even involved in the 9/11. Have
Right.
we're not part of the conversation, but because of our sort of cultural ignorance, any brown person with
I
headdress we
remember.
assume must be the people responsible for 9/11. So even in those moments where we say a catastrophe will unify us, we still manage to be racist in the moment. Um, so so and if you remove having a bad person as the enemy, if it weren't for Japan bombing Pearl Harbor, then maybe we wouldn't have treated Japanese Americans the same way. Well, COVID doesn't have a race or an ethnicity, and it came after all of us the exact same, and we still politicize that. We still put partisan labels on who wears a mask and who doesn't, whether there should be
Right.
curfew or not. And so the disease of partisanship infecting every element of every policy discussion, every competition between branches and ambition checking ambition, that's the thing that undermines our ability to find compromise. And until elected officials want to do a better job at representing their branch of government
Right.
and American people vote better representatives in office, I just don't know how we get past the partisan hump. It's not going to be some external factor that makes us unify. It's going to be a choice internally of people sick of how government's operating.
Yeah, it seems that, to an earlier point, and even in one of your articles, you talked about um, uh, grandparents and but more importantly, this fried turkey, scenario we're gonna have to get to, but to that point of family, I've I think, and to the guest question, it starts with the kitchen table and our sacrifice. If I'm 50 or 60 years old, I want life. I want a better America now. If I have the right to be selfish and look at what's going on and be mad, and or be optimistic or whatever's going on in my mind. But also, I may have a 3-year-old granddaughter or grandson, and by the time they're starting to look at things 20 and 30 years from now, when they're looking to buy a house or build a family, as Thomas Jefferson said, the Constitution should be different, or there's an opportunity to have a different world. So maybe it's this generation looking at our situation, but providing an education of nonpartisan labels to the upcoming generation and that
Mm.
sacrifice that you mentioned. But I mentioned the fried turkey, and I know that some of the guests are interested in that. If you could share that scenario, what we were talking about.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, sort of to this question of family, and then
Yeah.
connected to the column. It's weird. This year, Thanksgiving fell on a Thursday, and so did Christmas, and so did New Year's Day. And my column publishes in the print paper on on Thursdays. So I was the holiday guy for the column this year. And so for Thanksgiving, I wrote this one about frying a turkey, and just tried to use it as a metaphor for a nation. You know, on the cusp of, if they do things right, we all end up with a nice, beautiful, crispy, juicy turkey. If we get it wrong, we burn the house down. You've
You're
all
right.
seen the videos of what happens when you don't know what you're doing out there with a turkey fryer. So I just sort of use that analogy to where how it feels to be in the country right now, that we feel like we're on the cusp of something, that we just need to get things right, follow the steps exactly, and so that this thing doesn't blow up in our faces. But the when the founders created the country, the family was the basic unit
Hmm.
of of society, with
Yeah.
the man at the head. He was the only one who could own property in most cases. He was the only one that could vote in the family, and the man was sort of the representative for the women and children and folks in the household. But the basic unit of democracy is the citizen, the individual.
Hmm.
And so we're a society that's sort of family structured, but a democracy that's individual structured. And the way individuals get shaped and how they believe in politics is often through the family that raised them, where they grew up, and the people that they're raised by. So family is central to any conception of like a fair and liberal democracy. Um, and yet our notions of what a family is has changed in the last 50 100 years, of who can be head of household, who can be the breadwinner. They used to be nuclear families. You would have grandparents, parents, children, and maybe a cousin or two all in the same house.
Mm. Yeah.
Some demographics that's still true in America, and in a lot of places it isn't. So working parents is different than it used to be. Childcare concerns and costs and availability different than it used to be. Care for aging and elderly parents different than it used to be. And so if we drag these old structures from an industrial era America, and the social contract around labor and pensions
Right.
and sort of the society's responsibilities to the citizen, um, if the old systems just won't do well in sort of new societies. And the best folks positioned to let us know where the old structures are breaking in a new
Hmm.
America are young people.
Yes.
And so the in most places where we encounter young people, where intergenerational exchange happens, is still within the family. So families are not only places where older generations pass down knowledge about history and how to operate in systems and change structures and reform and that sort of thing. But it's also an exchange of information upward from young people about how to make the country better in ways that previous generations didn't exercise or didn't have the energy for.
All
The
right.
last thing I'll say, and then I'll be quiet, is
You're fine.
when Martin Luther King led the Montgomery bus boycott, he was 27 years old. I was
Hmm.
55. He was 26, 27 years old. Young
Right.
people have always been at the vanguard of change in the country. The
Lunch
founders were
counters.
not old men. The
Yeah.
founders were in their 30s and 40s, and so young people not only have like a responsibility, and the onus will be on them to take these systems forward, but they often have the answers for how to improve the systems, and an imagination, a level of creativity and energy that older generations, we've had our time in the sun, and it's sometimes it's time to seek leadership to young folks who have a better sense of what needs to
Yeah.
happen next.
That I think that answers, a couple of questions. The questions in the comments, they're looking at what we want to celebrate America 250, and we have a lot of, discord and political rhetoric, running around, and how can I find this pride? How can
Mhm.
I find this optimism? Because I am an American and I want to be proud. In less than 200 years, in 250 years, but definitely less than 200 years, we were the greatest power, and we're continuing to grow, and so that's, one of my perspectives there. But as you mentioned, the family as the core, the family is being redefined. The head of the household, or who can be the head of the household, is being redefined over time. But and that is at the core of democracy. And you expressed some optimism there, but to pull you back a little bit, and I thought it was compelling, the way you crafted it. And when the stars begin to fall, you said, democracy is going to hell in a breadbasket. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, and so I like to reconcile that, because people, they're conflicted. They feel both right now. There are people who are prideful and want to wave the flag, and maybe they have a list of things, core values, six of them they can rattle off quickly. But right now, three or four of them are in jeopardy. And so,
Mm.
how can I be prideful for America 250 this year when some of my questions are not being answered the way I need them to be?
Yeah. No, look, it's tough. I mean, when you're not happy with the state of the country as it is, it's hard to sing happy birthday to it,
Hmm.
um, and the only thing I would encourage is um, the you know for as unsatisfying as the nation is, the people that helped get it to where it is deserve a little, deserve some thanks, deserve some
Hmm.
recognition, deserve some commemoration. And so for me, when I celebrate the country, I don't celebrate its actions at any given point in time.
Hmm.
Um, what I'm celebrating is sort of like the arc, the journey, the values that it was founded on, even if it hasn't lived up to them. And so if you belong to church, that a lot of bad things have been done in the name of the church, but
Ah,
you still go to church, because it's not the church that you're actually praising, worshiping. That's just the container for a set of beliefs and
that's the
values.
iteration. Yes.
That's it, right, right. That's the interaction. That's the interface between values and people is the institution. And so you can express appreciation for the institution without worshiping it. And for me, the values, the idea of the country is worth celebration, even though it's done bad stuff, and even though I've worn the uniform, and a lot of bad things. There are people doing things in uniform today that I am ashamed of. But I'm not ashamed of my service, So
Mm.
it's being able to disentangle the actions of the nation at any given point in time from the people that have the sort of held the nation, kept the nation accountable, or held it to a higher standard and compelled it to get better, even if just a little bit incrementally over time. And to me, as we're celebrating. And I may not have a flag flying outside my house, or a lapel pin on every jacket that I wear, but um, those outward displays of patriotism are much less important
All
than
right.
I think a belief in the founding principles that guide the country. And if you like the principles and what it was founded on, then I think you've got enough space to be proud of the country. And it's as difficult as it can be, especially given how things are now.
I I love that. If you're a principled person and you like the principles, you have space and there's patience. If you believe, if the church, the institution means something, but you hear in the news the pastor did something and he shouldn't have done,
Right.
I can still go to church, not like the people who are leading the charge right now. It's a chapter in our life. We're gonna move to the next chapter, or I believe in the
Mhm.
values. Ted, you have a fan in the comments. I'm gonna read this. I'm not sure how she pulled all this together in this short amount of time, but I'm gonna read and paraphrase, but some of it is very eloquent. So I attended your last presentation offered through the Village Square. You had mentioned small things people could do to continue to promote democracy. Go somewhere you are the minority,
Yeah.
possibly uncomfortable. I love that. I remember that. Go somewhere that you're possibly uncomfortable with something you mentioned. A series of coincidences landed me attending a small rural black community church. I am a 59-year-old white woman. It was initially very uncomfortable.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, okay. That's very honest. Thinking I could be being intrusive. The pastors were sincere and welcoming. I have been attending for the last 8 or 9 months, Ted, and
Mm,
slowly and authentically, we are all becoming comfortable and sincerely bonded. I'm gonna stop there, but I think that speaks to some of your examples of bringing people together,
right.
the comedy, the sports, and you can reflect on that. This is a fan, and she went on, and thank you for that comment. Yeah,
Yeah, no, so I love that example and I the honesty in it. It is hard to
yeah,
walk into a place where there aren't any other people like you.
mm,
You feel more conspicuous. You know, you feel like every eye is on you because you're the one that stands out. And to learn how to be comfortable there and um, accept the differences is it's not easy, but it is essential to this thing we're trying to do in the country.
yeah,
If you don't know the people you share the country with, it's really difficult to sacrifice for them when the government starts to turn the screws. You know, if you don't know anyone who's undocumented, it's hard. It can be hard to have sympathy for undocumented people in a time like this. If you know just a single person who might be have their life disrupted by the way government's currently exercising policy, you have a different connection to government. You have a different understanding of policy and a different appreciation for how others experience policy. And that, to me, makes for stronger democracies. So
yeah.
the one thing healthy societies require, especially diverse ones and large ones, is are people being vulnerable with strangers, democratic strangers, you know,
Hmm.
and it is not natural to be vulnerable with strangers. The first thing we want to do is sort of hunker down
Right.
and protect ourselves and feel stable and secure and not be vulnerable. But healthy societies allow for that vulnerability. And the ways I think to practice that vulnerability is to do exactly what what the woman just said is to actually go be vulnerable
Right.
and get to know people who are different from you, and you'll find that there is a basis for connection, and being vulnerable together makes for
Yeah.
stronger societies, more resilient
I
connections.
love that. Being vulnerable together.
Hmm.
Yeah, I've been faced with that with Florida Humanities. We have a board of directors. They come from all parts of the state, different backgrounds, and they have term limits. They rotate on and off, of course. And so we have to get to know them individually.
Hmm.
And to be honest, I haven't always done the best job of getting to know all of them. Here and there, we have a couple of dozen board members, but recently have had activities that, given enough time, you're standing there talking, and then you make this connection
Hmm.
and you don't realize that the connection was there. You have to be patient enough to listen, and then you learn. And it brings me to a previous point about responsibility that we talked about. If I don't take time to get to know my neighbor, that neighbor hasn't taken that same amount of time to get to know me. But now there's something on the voting block. There's something that is going to impact both of us, and we don't have a chance to talk to each other, then where's the responsibility? There's a level of complacency that we need to find a way to avoid. And I think your programs at us at 250 really help us navigate that.
Mm.
I think that if we can find a way to duplicate those programs, um, even in the most simplest forms, there's the value there. So as we
Mhm.
navigate this year, definitely, I want to hear about some of the things that you feel that we can take from what the successes you've had and the outcomes you were anticipating. That the communities here, many of these questions um, have a lovely redundancy. There people are in the comments. They're really trying to find a way
Yeah.
to into that. I don't even have to say the rest of it. They're trying to find a way. They're hurting.
Right.
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah. They're
Yeah.
hurting, but they're trying to find a way. So, what are some things at the local level do you feel that we can take from us at 250?
Yeah, it's so interesting. The column that is it'll be out tomorrow morning online, and then in the print edition on Thursday in the Washington Post. That this week is I received an email from a high school student last Friday. So she read my column last week, where I basically said that, ICE is an example of what unaccountable federal power looks like. And it's an example of a republic that's thinning, where
Hmm.
all the power is accruing to the executive and the other branches, and the people are being squeezed out of away from government and are just sort of subject to it, or objects of it. And so she wrote me and said, we have an assignment in our English class to read a column. I read yours, and I just have two questions, and they were
Yeah.
big questions. The first one she asked was, um, what can ordinary people do to change government, especially
Hmm.
those folks that may not be super active in their communities? And the second thing she asked was, who do you think is being affected most by the government's policies, and how can we help them? And it's
Mm.
and I
How
it
old
to
was the
me
student?
she was an AP student in high school, so
Oh,
16,
wow.
17 years old. Yeah. And this is it's a question that I think a lot of adults are asking, like, what do we do?
Yeah.
What do we do? And so the column is, I sort of sent her, probably four sentences, maybe five sentences or so, saying, it's important to be engaged and do this thing and that thing, call
Right.
your senator, blah, blah, blah. And it all felt very unsatisfying. And so I wrote this column to sort of unpack the answers a little bit. And coincidentally, in the Atlantic, George Packer has a new article out about what do we do now? And it's like
Mm.
this feeling of like everyone's asking, what do we do? How do we stop the chaos?
Mm.
And I think in the New York Times there was a recent opinion conversation between a few folks. David French was one of them, about
Mhm.
what do we do if people say, well, how, what do we do to fight back? How do we stop government? It's a question on everyone's mind. So I'll just sort of preview the article, and it will be unsatisfying as just as it was to provide the answer, but it's still true nonetheless. Um, my sense of it is, when government is abusing its power, or when it's not being responsive to the people, you can exert pressure from within the halls of power, or from outside of the halls of power. Outside of the halls of power is, protest, freedom of speech, freedom of press, insisting on government accountability, and insisting on, like, humane treatment and due process. But it is basically using your constitutional rights of protest and speech,
Hmm.
and reaching out to, civic engagement and mobilizing communities to try to pressure government to stop what it's doing.
Right.
That is can feel inadequate when government has guns, when government's not listening to you, when your protest is being put down by armored vehicles and non-lethal fires. So it doesn't feel satisfying, but it's still necessary, to make government do better. You can
Yeah.
also create pressure from inside the system, and that's where voting comes in. Put in better people, fix the primary process, get dark money out of politics, so that our elections are fairer, that votes count for, or are counted equally, and
Right.
that we are creating a system that incentivizes responsiveness. But crises don't wait for election day. You know,
Yeah.
things don't wait for the next Congress to get in before they break. So that feels inadequate because you got to wait for elections before you can do anything. And
Mm.
so I told her one of the things I said was the one thing, and you know, by the way, every democracy answer I gave her, she couldn't exercise because she wasn't of age yet. She couldn't vote. She wasn't
Ah,
18.
yeah.
So I'm giving her these process structure answers that she can't even access. Yes, she can protest. Sure,
Mm.
she can call her senator, but changing the structure is she has been excluded from that process. And so I sort of felt bad about it, and I said, you know what? The one thing we can all do is just be better neighbors,
Yeah.
and that wasn't satisfying. To her second question, you know, about who's hurt most, I told her that the people at the pointy end of government sword are the people that are affected most by any government policy. And healthy societies do a number of things. They dull the sword so it's not as pointy. They get in between the point and those being harmed by it to
Right.
protect them. In liberal democracies, the minority people in the minority have access to all of the rights that people in the majority do, to include due process and the right to humane treatment and all of the rights guaranteed in the Constitution and the promises in the Declaration, um, or to to change the law, you know,
Right.
so that the pointy end isn't pointy for anyone anymore, that it's
Wow.
now
Okay.
redirected. But even that felt unsatisfying because it all insists like that stuff doesn't happen overnight. But Renee Good was, you know, is not here because
Yeah.
of it. She sends me this email on Friday. On Saturday, Alex Preddy is killed.
Yeah.
And then on Sunday, you know, a winter and ice storm sweep the country. Over 1 million people lose power. And I had not yet replied to her. And so I sort of, the last thing I say to her in this column, which is the last thing I wish I had said in my email to her, is in a couple of generations from now, it may be that an AP student, when you're in your 30s or
Right.
so, in your 40s, comes to you and says, "The winter when the immigration agents killed Good and Pretty, um, what did you do? What answer would you be proud to give that student who's asking you? And whatever that answer is that you will be proud to give, do that today."
Mm.
And that's how you know how to be a good neighbor and what you can do in this moment. For some people, it's writing. For some people, it's coming to conversations hosted by Village Square. For some people, it's giving money. Some people go protest, go to Minnesota, write their, you know, call their senator, visit their offices, whatever it is you do. Um, if you can be proud of what you're doing, then you're doing the right thing. And if you're in the part of America that's proud of government's abuse of power, um, uh, uh, my sense is you would not be proud to share that with your grandchild, you know, 2 or 3 generations from
Yeah.
now. And if you are, then I think you're in the minority, in the deep minority in this country. Most people don't want to be on the wrong side of history. Um, so it's unsatisfying to say rely on structure and process, but that's what we do in democracies. It's
Hmm.
unsatisfying to say to pick better leaders, but that's what republic requires. It's unsatisfying to say to use the courts to keep government in check and to use our vote to keep
Right.
politicians in check. It's not, you know, it doesn't feel like it meets the urgency of the moment. All of those things are required, and protest and
Mm.
activism and being good to other people. And if we do a little bit of all of those things, then I think we've done our part to make the country stronger. And hopefully it happens in our lifetime. But even if it doesn't, we can be proud of the legacy we leave for
Yeah.
posterity.
I think so. I, I know you're saying it's unsatisfying, but as we start to wrap up here, um, would you share it with uh, that high school student was what we were talking about in the previous iteration of this question about hope and what can we do now? And, you know, we can be a little selfish and want things to happen now. We want a resolution now. But this American experiment of how we reached this point this year as we reflect, that's 250 years and everything is not fixed. There's some things that are fixed. You know, the the suffragette movement, that, there was 115 years of craziness there, and it was time for women to vote. And why didn't they vote in the beginning? But as we move to some of these other last, question that I think is very important, audience, I want you to know that as we mold these programs, you took hopefully you took a pre-survey before you start to examine and listen to me tell these weird jokes and listen to Ted, inform me about more patriotism, which is what we're going to go to. Take the post survey. Take the post survey so that we can get the proper data and analyze. The link is in the chat, and somebody's going to win $100 gift card. Yeah, but democratic inheritance, more patriotism, and obligation. You describe moral patriotism as emerging not from power but from those most harmed by America's failures. And we people, and you described it, I think, beautifully, that there are people who see the immigration efforts as needed, and there are people that see harm there. And um, there's a voice, there are platforms, and there are structures there. I'm not sure if that's what you mean by moral patriotism, but I'm ready to learn. Can you tell me, yeah, can you tell me what you mean by moral patriotism? For me, and I'll tell you why I asked that question last, is because I think that there's a measure of education, people like me or anybody who feel that there's an opportunity to do something. I want to have hope, but and I want to reflect on America 250 and be optimistic, but I also see things in my core value system that are not resonating the way I would like. So, I'm wondering, what can I do? And so more patriotism than what we've inherited, democratic inheritance, and what you gave that young lady. If we could
Yeah.
speak.
Yeah. So, I typically think of patriotism in three buckets. The
Hmm.
first is, I've mentioned, uncritical patriotism. It's the version that it's the Stephen Decatur version, the old toast from the 18th century, the Navy admiral who says, who gives a toast, "Our country in her intercourse with other nations, may she always be in the right, but our country right or wrong." Essentially, no matter what she does, you know, she's ours, and so even when she's in the wrong, well, hey, it's our country. We got to, love it or leave it, kind of thing. And that kind of patriotism often gets co-opted by people that want to, use patriotism for political ends, and not as a way of truly creating affection or a reverence for the country. So uncritical patriotism isn't helpful at all. It absolves the country of everything and only lavishes it with praise. Then
Mm,
more of a civic constitutional patriotism is one where you believe in the founding documents. I believe in the promise and the Declaration. I
yeah.
believe in the Bill of Rights and the constitutional rights that document provides, but it grounds all the things that unite us to the document. We are democratic brothers because we both believe the Constitution is a precious document, and so the Constitution, the civics of the country become our connection. But black soldiers fought alongside white soldiers for the
It,
same Constitution, for the same country, but didn't get the same respect from the country
uh,
on the back end of that service. So even civic patriotism, constitutional patriotism, isn't sufficient for equal rights. Moral patriotism is the one that holds the country to its values. You say you
mm,
believe that equal protection is available to all of us, no matter our race, no matter our gender. Prove it. You say that I can vote, and my color, ethnicity shouldn't matter. Let's see. You say I have equal opportunity and unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the
hmm
pursuit of happiness. show me the country that makes that possible, and it compels the country to change by holding it accountable to who it says it is. And that kind of moral patriotism is durable. It lasts generations. It's why the Constitution doesn't need to be rewritten every generation, because values of equality and liberty and equal
Hmm.
protection don't need a generational exponent. It
Right.
doesn't need it doesn't need that connection. It's available to all of us. It's the thing that makes it's supposed to make our country different. We've fallen short, and there's lots of room for improvement. But look, I'll tell you, I mean, we talked about my name. I don't know that my great grandparents could have ever imagined that when they decided to name their third son after the sitting president, that 110 years later, their child bearing the same name, great grandchild bearing the same name, would be in the White House with a Black president, telling them the story telling this president their story.
Right.
And it's sort of faith in things not seen, hope for but not seen. But a faith that only produced progress because people worked at bringing it to fruition. So you don't have to see around the corner. You don't have to see the successes to know that the work is worth it, because we are living through someone else's dream version of the country. We
Yeah.
are the product of other people's work, and the fulfillment of their dreams for the country. And if we want the next set of generations to have a better version, to inherit a better version of the country, it's incumbent upon us to do our part to advance it, just as generations before us did theirs.
Well, I think that's well stated and lovely. I think you did it. I think you've given us something to think about. I think you framed a perspective. Us at 250, we have time to support your efforts and understand the power of gathering, keeping
Mhm.
that coffee date. We looked
Right.
at pride. There were the arguments about hope and America 250, how can we reconcile that when our values are not there? Reckoning, we talked about reckoning, and don't have amnesia, but get up and move and take a step forward. Aspiration leads us right into optimism, and it resonates with me. And hopefully, to the audience, I want you to send Ted a great thanks, and he's winning. He's the Tom Brady and the Mike Tomlin of this situation. He's come back three times. No one has done it ever. In my Stephen A. Smith voice, oh, here we are.
Right.
And on behalf of Florida Humanities and the Village Square, Ted, thank you. And to our
Thank y'all.
streaming partners, we thank you for distributing this. It's a time for us to reflect and be political, be friendly, not to kill each other, learn, be neighbors. Um, Thanks, everyone, and good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank y'all.